Well, hello, Canadian Campaholic here, coming to you on a glorious early August day. It's hard to believe it's August now. We're about halfway through the 2018 camping season. The purpose of today's video is to talk about the first legitimate failure or challenge that we had with our 2018 Salem Cruise Lite. If you watched one of my earlier videos on the pros and cons of a new RV or a new travel trailer versus a used travel trailer, one of the things that I talked about was the risk of warranty work. Last month, we were camping at a provincial park north of here when we noticed that the furnace, the onboard suburban furnace, was activating on its own. So let's talk about what the problem was and what we did to troubleshoot it. When we arrived at the provincial park, I was actually standing here filling the potable water tank. And as I was standing there filling that tank, and it's 40 gallons, so it takes a little while, I noticed that there was a fan running somewhere, and I really couldn't figure out where that fan noise was coming from. Turns out it was this, our suburban propane furnace. It was running completely on its own, which of course was a great concern. Now, the first thing I immediately assumed, it must have been the thermostat. Maybe it got bumped, maybe it moved. So I went up inside the trailer and I looked at the thermostat, and lo and behold, actually not lo and behold, but disappointingly, it was not switched on. The furnace had somehow activated on its own. So as I mentioned, once we got the trailer backed into the campsite, the first thing I did once again was to check and confirm to ensure that the thermostat here on the wall was in the off position. On the Suburban thermostats, you can push the lever to the right to activate the furnace to set the temperature, and then it clicks to the left to disconnect all the contacts, well, not all the contacts, but to disconnect a contact within the thermostat and actually shut the furnace off. In theory, if everything is working correctly, if this is in the off position, there is no way that that furnace down there should operate. But as you heard in my little anecdote there, it was definitely coming on. So over the course of the 3 or 4 days that we were camping, the furnace came on, I think, 2 more times. And what was very concerning about it was that it wasn't just a case of the fan running, but the furnace would actually ignite. It would blow hot air, and it would run a complete cycle. Now, this was on a weekend where, much like today, it's like 90 degrees, and it was very disconcerting having your furnace running when, in all actuality, you should have your AC running. It also really worried me because, as I mentioned in my first video when we bought this trailer, is that the dealership where we purchased it from is a good 3-hour drive away from our home. Towing it with our vehicle, that would equate to close to $160 in gas to drive there and back to get warranty work done. Now, that was a gamble I took, and I understood that when I purchased the trailer. But we've been very lucky. We've had no major issues up until this point. So I reached out to the dealership to try and find out what the issue was. I also went into the power converter box or power box, whatever you want to call it, and I located the 12 amp fuse rather, that powers the furnace, and I actually removed it. That way, there was no chance of the furnace kicking on by itself. There is an on-off switch on the side of these furnaces, but as you saw, my furnace is under the cabinet there. It's very, very hard to get to and to service. The button is very difficult to access, so the fuse was a temporary solution. So, we did a couple of things. We got onto an online forum, a Forest River forum, and posted our problem. It was a difficult issue to troubleshoot because most people have issues where their furnace doesn't work, not an issue where the furnace is coming on all the time. Thanks to the folks on the Forest River forum, I was able to get my hands on a service manual, which included wiring diagrams and troubleshooting steps for suburban furnaces. There was also a number on the manual that enabled me to call a wonderful tech with Suburban Manufacturing in the U.S., and I just want to give them huge kudos here. They were extremely helpful, very, very kind. And they reiterated the same advice that the folks on the forums gave me, that they believed that somewhere between the furnace and the thermostat, the 2 thermostat wires that run from the back of the thermostat down into the furnace, they'd shorted together. The theory was that during the manufacturing process with Forest River, somebody had stapled the wires together or screwed or stapled a component together and accidentally put the staple through the wires. And the thought process there was that over the course of the trailer bouncing around and moving down the road, that the wires were actually shorting out and basically doing what the thermostat does. Because when you slide this over, it creates a connection between the 12-volt wire that is coming up out of the furnace into the thermostat, and that creates a connection with the other wire, which then runs down back to the furnace to create what is called a heat call, and that triggers the furnace. If those two wires are somehow shorted between those 2 points, then that is a likely cause. And that's actually what the dealer said. They were willing, for the record, to take a look at the furnace and take a look at it for me. They recommended, and this is the funny part, to remove the thermostat and gently tug on the wires. The theory there from the dealers was that it would dislodge the issue. Not a very feasible solution. You figure the wires probably start here. They probably run all the way up, probably to the ceiling, or maybe down into the floor. They go through all this cabinetry and then into the side of the furnace. So anyway, the other thing that I did, and this is what the tech from Suburban suggested, was that I disconnect the wires from the thermostat. I disconnect the wires where they pigtail into the furnace. There's 2 blue wires that come out of the side of your furnace. Those 2 blue wires are for your thermostat. If they are connected, it triggers the furnace to kick in. He said disconnect the thermostat wires underneath here, which actually turned out to be very easy to do. Disconnect them here and hook up a multimeter, a testing tool, and check for continuity, basically to see if it is a complete circuit somewhere. Because the theory here was the wires are shorted somewhere, it's creating a circuit, and that's accidentally starting the furnace. Now, the Suburban Tech did reassure me that the voltage going through here is only 12 volts. The ampage is extremely low, so there's very little risk of a fire or me hurting myself, and using the multimeter was safe. Well, during a camping trip, I removed the thermostat, disconnected the wires underneath here. I was able to move everything around just a little bit, very gently, tested for continuity, and folks, strangely, there was no continuity. I managed to put everything back together, reconnected the wires into the thermostat. See if I can pop this off. So there's a white wire, and I know that's not focusing, but there's a white wire and a red wire. These are the 2 wires that are together in insulation. This is a Honeywell thermostat wire setup. And make sure that these were reconnected here at the thermostat, and also making sure they were properly reconnected using the correct connectors into the furnace. Now, a quick disclaimer here. If you're ever going to do any kind of work on a furnace, I would highly recommend that you get a qualified service tech to do the work for you, especially if it's involving electrical and gas. I've said this before in other videos, but if you mess around with that stuff and you don't know what you're doing, that could be dangerous. In this case, I was not removing the furnace. I was not touching the propane fittings. I was simply doing a little bit of a continuity test on the wires and just putting some screws back together. So I was confident that I could do that job myself. Well, the strange thing, folks, is once we reconnected the wires through this access panel here, by the way, we also located the off switch for the furnace. You got to stick your head in there and contort yourself, and you can actually switch it off instead of pulling the fuse. But anyway, we reconnected all the wiring, reconnected it here, and the furnace has not come on by itself ever since. It is not activated, and we drove all the way home from that camping trip. We did another camping trip. After that, the trailer, would have jostled around a fair bit during both trips, but I'm very pleased to say that at no point did the furnace reactivate. So, not 100% sure whether that's a permanent fix. I guess we'll have to keep an eye on it. Let's now talk about why I decided to troubleshoot it myself and why I opted not to take it to the dealer. Because some of you may be scratching your head thinking, his trailer's in warranty. Why is he farting around doing this himself? So let's talk about that. So, why did I choose to research this myself? Why did I not take it back to the dealer? When we purchased this unit in September of last year, we got an amazing deal from a dealer that is about 3 hours away from our home. And as you heard me mention earlier in the video, I calculated it, and to tow this trailer to the dealership, probably come home, because I'm not going to have it done in a day, and then have to go back, pick it up, and drive home again, towing the trailer, I was looking at anywhere between $160 to $200 Canadian in fuel. That's a lot of money to be spending on gas. The other issue is, with a mysterious issue like this, it could have been a quick fix, could have been a couple of hours, or it could have been weeks, which in the middle of the camping season, that's a huge inconvenience. And the way I looked at it was that the furnace works. It's not a case of the fact that it doesn't function at all. If I knew where the on-off switch was, my temptation was to just switch it off, pull the fuse. In the fall, when we need the furnace, I could use it at that time. If you have shore power, if you have your 110 connection, you can very easily use a portable heater, like a ceramic furnace that has a fan on it that blows hot air. That will easily keep the interior of this trailer very, very warm. But if you're boondocking, or if, let's say, you lose power at your campsite, you definitely want to have the furnace available, because it runs off a 12-volt power off of your battery, your RV battery, and propane, which you have in your tank at the front of the trailer. So I definitely wanted to have it as an option. If the furnace was completely not working, or if my little bit of troubleshooting that I just described hadn't worked, then yes, I would have bit the bullet. I would have taken it to the RV dealer. I would have let a professional take a look at it. In the event that the problem doesn't go away, the other option would be to completely rewire the thermostat, so completely remove all of the thermostat wiring and redo it. The other option would be to pull the furnace. I have a relative who is a qualified gas fitter, so I'd probably have him help with that, because it involves the propane fitting, and just checking and inspecting the wiring. The other thing with these Suburban furnaces is that you can buy an aftermarket control board, because the other possibility in this case, which the tech at Suburban said was unlikely, but the possibility was that the control board had a short in it, and that somewhere in the control board, the 12-volt feed coming into the furnace was jumping over and creating a connection, causing the furnace to kick on. Those boards are a little hard to access. They're not that difficult to take off and to replace. You just got to make sure that you label all your wiring and put it back correctly. They're not that expensive. There's a company called Dinosaur. I believe they're a U.S. manufacturer. I could be wrong. They make aftermarket boards for Suburban furnaces, and apparently they're not that expensive. They're between $80 to $100 U.S., and they work very, very well. In fact, a lot of retailers, dealers rather, will stock those boards to replace the board on the furnace itself. So there's options. But again, if there was a major catastrophic problem with the trailer, would I try and just fix it myself? Well, I would certainly troubleshoot it myself. The dealer's not just down the street. The other issue is that if you try to take this to another Forest River dealer, they're going to be very hesitant to help you, because they make very little money on warranty repairs. So if they didn't buy it from you, they're going to do everything they can to kind of push you to the back of the line. So that wasn't an option. There are some dealers here in Canada now that are part of something called, I think it's like RV Care or something like that, where any one of those dealers in the network will help you in times like this. Sadly, the dealer I purchased the unit from is not part of that network, but I digress. So yeah, it was a little frustrating. You know, this has been a phenomenal trailer. We've had very, very few issues to speak of. The only other issue that we had that I'll speak about just very quickly is that underneath the bed, there are wooden supports that go underneath the bed. And one of the supports that they selected had a huge knot in it, because it's actual raw lumber. And it had a knot in it, which created, shall we say, a weakness. And then, of course, with my wife and I sleeping on the bed, it actually started to crack. Now, it didn't break completely, but it started to separate where the knot in the wood was, and it creaked like crazy. So I fixed that myself as well. I basically got a metal bracket at a hardware store and a couple of decent length wood screws, and I used a drill to screw that into the support, the wood support, to actually just kind of reinforce it. And I thought someone was coming in the trailer. It's the wind blowing the door. But I used the bracket to reinforce the wood to stop it creaking. So that, little minor things like that are to be expected. And as you've heard me say before, that is the inherent risk when you buy a new travel trailer, is that these things are not always manufactured with the greatest level of care. And in your shakedown period of the first year or so that you own it, you will get some hiccups here and there. And I suppose if I'd bought a used unit and it had been taken care of, those would have been fixed. But anyway. The other little thing that I wanted to mention, it's not really a failure, but a consideration if you're buying a travel trailer. We opted to buy a trailer that has a wall-mounted air conditioning unit. It typically makes the unit a little cheaper, less expensive. You don't have to have as much roof clearance. It brings it down to around 10 feet as opposed to about 13, 14 feet if you had a roof-mounted air conditioner. The other consideration is, I've said this in some of my other videos as well, is that with these wall-mounted air conditioners, you can conservatively get away with running it on a 15 amp connection because they only need about 6 amps to run. You just got to be very careful that you don't run anything else like a TV or a microwave or anything else. But you can get away, if you don't have 30 amp service, with running this on 15 amp. If you look below it here, there's a channel, a water channel with spouts. And the idea is that as the air conditioner runs, it'll dribble water out of the bottom there into this channel. It'll completely bypass the window, and the beautiful spouts, the 4-inch spouts, will dribble the water on the off side of the trailer. Well, that's the theory, folks. And if you've ever put a window-mounted air conditioner in your home, you know that you have to make sure it's sloped a little bit, because what happens if you don't slope it? The water will piss inside your house, or in this case, inside the trailer. Now, I will say, without going back in the trailer, there is a little bit of a slope, a little bit of an angle, very, very slight angle on the air conditioner. But I have discovered, much to my dismay, that unless you lean the trailer towards the air conditioner, it does not do a very effective job of draining. What happens is the water pools up underneath the air conditioner, and eventually you will start to get water dripping inside, which is bad, bad news. It could cause rot, it could cause mold, all kinds of problems. If you saw in an earlier video, I purchased and reviewed some Camco leveling blocks. And the one strategy I've employed is to actually not only try to level the trailer, that's always critical when you get to your campsite, but I've actually started putting the leveling blocks more so under this tire so that the trailer starts to lean towards the air conditioner. Now, you would think that would be the easy fix, but I have to tell you, during our most recent camping trip, we had this trailer tilted so far over that the drawer inside the trailer kept coming open on its own. It wasn't an extreme list, you know, you weren't like walking on a hill, but it was noticeable. Yes, the trailer drained. It's not the trailer rather, but the air conditioner drained. It did not completely drain. Once we finished packing up and we towed the trailer home, sure enough, a ton more water came out of the air conditioner. Some of it came out inside the unit. So, buyer beware. These wall-mounted air conditioners are not always what they seem. They work very well. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's an 8,000 BTU. You could hang meat in this trailer when it runs. But I'm very disappointed that when they built it and they installed it, they didn't put it on more of an angle. One day I might explore taking the paneling off inside the trailer to see if there's any way that I could force the air conditioner to be tilted a little more. That's a little project that I'm going to work on. But yeah, that is another, I wouldn't say failure, but I would say another little thing that we've discovered in the course of owning a trailer. But I don't want to sound too negative. You know, having a trailer like this is a huge privilege. I had someone chastise me in the comments the other day. You know, not everybody can afford to buy a $16,000 trailer. And that's a very valid point. That is a very valid point. And I know my tone's a little mocking, but yeah, that's a valid point. This is a huge investment, but also something that we should feel very privileged to own, and we should enjoy owning. And these little things, these little issues, these little failures that we're dealing with, that's all part of the experience. To quote Clark Griswold, it's all part of the experience, honey. So anyway, happy camping. We'll talk to you soon.